Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Ignorant Conversations podcast, a conversation between two friends about the different types of books we read every week. You can go after the job you want and get it. You can take the job you have and improve it. You can take any situation you're in and make it work for you. Does this sound like clickbait from 1936? I don't know. Here is my good friend Mobeen, and he's gonna tell us whether it is clickbait or not. So, what's up, Mobeen?
Hey, Davud, how are you doing, man? Thanks for
Ah,
that infomercial of introduction, but I'll take it because we don't want to do any retakes. So let's go on
yeah,
with this.
yeah.
So last week you covered, ancient Greek philosophy for us, and you
Yeah, what a
focused on
drag.
I quite liked it. It was
Oh,
quite nice,
thank you.
and I hadn't been introduced to Diogenes's, his life story prior to that, and it was quite exciting for me. This
Nice.
week, though, we're going to focus on sort of the philosophy of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's called "How to Win Friends and Influence People" by Dale Carnegie. And
Mm-hmm.
usually, I'm suspicious of books, sort of like self-help books, because I don't think they're, you know, quite helpful, honestly. But
Yeah.
Dale Carnegie's book was published back in, I think, 1936, and it's about 80 years old, about more than 80 years ago. From what I've read and from what I could gather from it, there's a few fundamental things that it mentions that are actually relevant. And the way he's written the book, it's not sort of like your, YouTuber guru these days. So it's not just fluff and, trying to get you to spend money and selling you something that's not that great. I mean, what he talks about are some sort of essentials for life, just how to, well, basically, what the way he talks about it is, how must you sort of conduct yourself
Mm-hmm.
to ensure that people like you. That's really what it is. So there's not a lot of crazy things. It's just some essentials on how to make people like you, and sort of like how what the human behavior is, or why is it that these things will ensure that people like you. So that's really what he talks about.
Sounds like BuzzFeed's Bible.
No, I think it's better than that. I
You're
mean,
telling me the Bible's
I,
bad?
well, I haven't read it. I just
Oh,
figured if I chuckle enough, we can move past something that I'm ignorant
okay.
about.
Hey, it's called Ignorant Conversations, man. What do you expect?
That's fair. All right. So the book has a lot of principles. That's what he calls them, that one must abide by.
Mm-hmm.
It's far too many, and I suggest that what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about sort of the fundamentals, some quotes that I found interesting, and some interesting examples that he shares.
Okay.
And hopefully, that should give an idea to people listening on whether this is a book that they would be interested or not. The book basically focuses on four main things. That's how it's structured. The first is, what are the fundamental techniques of handling people? For a book that wants you to be nice to people, handling people is not really the best way to say it. But
That
regardless, this is
sounds
what
a
he
little
says.
bit deceptive.
I think maybe you have to understand this book was published 80 years ago, so it's possible that the way we read something is not exactly how it was
Oh,
intended.
yeah. They were
Yeah,
like more deceptive back then?
I think handling here might have handling people has a negative connotation now in that sense, but back then that wasn't the case. That's really
Oh,
what it
okay.
is.
Yeah, this is like pre-World War II, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The next is six ways to make people like you,
Okay.
how to win people to your way of thinking. And lastly, it focuses on how to be a leader, how to change a person's opinion without giving offense or without arousing a resentment in them. So these are basically the things he focuses on. And to be honest, a lot of the principles will overlap because what he really tells you is be a nice person. I mean, that's fundamentally what it is. And turns out that if you're, shocker, if you're nice to people, they're likely to be nice to you as well. But
Whoa.
this guy, man, this guy had the insights that we still haven't gotten, let's say. So basically, that's basically the whole book, and all what this book is just filled with examples. So whenever he talks about a principle, he brings real life examples, and he'll talk about a famous, like this is a man who's read a lot of biographies. Let's say of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. You name it, you name someone famous in that era, or like prior to that era, and he's read those biographies because he's trying to understand, people who were famous for diplomacy. Let's say
Right.
Abraham Lincoln. Why is it that they turned out that way? And that's sort of how he worked to figure out people who were successful and people who were lovable. How did they achieve this? And so he gives examples of that. And also, he used to give lectures on this, and people would come who would use his methodology and incorporate it into their lives. And then they would say, "Oh, I did so and so, and now, like, I'm being really successful, and thank you for this." So he uses those examples. So in that sense, the book is, I think, you could say it's 10% principles, and it's 90% examples of how those principles are applied. That's
Okay.
basically how he runs it. Yeah. So basically, if you think about, like, when he talks about the fundamental techniques of handling people, which is his, main thing, it's sort of simple stuff. Like, I'll tell you, he says, don't criticize or condemn people. When they do something, give them honest and sincere appreciation. And these are the two most important principles that he
That,
mentions. And that,
that doesn't make sense though.
why do you say that?
I mean, don't condemn people or don't criticize people and give them compliments whenever they do something nice. That doesn't sound sincere. Or, I mean, how can you be nice and honest if you can't criticize when something needs to be criticized?
That's fair. And I think this is something that he tackles as well, that he says, like, you don't want just, unwarranted appreciation, because it just becomes unnecessary flattery, and everyone can see through that. The way he talks about it, to sometimes it's a lot, right? Like the appreciation he talks about and how little one should criticize. It
Hmm.
maybe it goes to the extremes. You're right. For example, he talks about this battle. So this is, I think, during the Civil War, and Abraham Lincoln tells General Meade is the one that is pushing back General Lee, and General Lee is sort of his troops are exhausted, and he's stuck between a river, and this is the
Hmm.
time to really push through and defeat General Lee's army. And when that happens, General Meade actually holds up, lets his troops rest. And by that time, the sort of storm has gone over, and General Lee manages to cross the river and survive, right? And
Okay.
had he been defeated at that point, things would have turned out a lot better, a lot sooner. And
Okay.
Abraham Lincoln is very, very pissed off at this, because this is something they're trying to win for a while. A lot of troops have lost their life, and this guy, had he been just a little more courageous, he could have made that push and got it done. So when he writes that letter to General Meade, if you read that letter, the entire time there's almost no criticism. He talks about how he appreciates his intellect, his ability, which is why he was given this post, and how he was expected to fight General Lee, and it was an opportune time. But it's basically, he doesn't deride the man. And here's how little Abraham Lincoln was willing to criticize later on in life, that this letter was actually never sent. They found this letter later on, when in his home somewhere, like locked up. He never actually sent the letter.
Yeah, because it's a horrible letter. He messed up. He messed up big time.
That's fair. I
Yeah.
mean, to be honest, I don't understand that. These are the things that I don't know if people back then were just like, these things affected them. Like how about, like, back in the day, let's say when samurais were a big thing in Japan, they'd commit suicide out of
Yeah.
embarrassment, right?
If yeah, yeah, or they brought dishonor to their family or whatever.
Exactly, right? So it was just such a big thing. It was expected, because that's how people were back then. And now it's just, it's nothing of that sort, right? People don't hold each other to such high traditions or so much accountability, or like we hold each other to we account people are held accountable for different things now, let's say. And that's what it was, when he writes that letter about 150, 200 years ago. I forgot when the Civil War was. When he talks about that, I guess this was just the way of talking. So it may seem crazy to us. It still does. I completely agree with you. But this is just how the man was.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, it is like important to contextualize,
Yeah.
a piece of historical writing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that's actually why I was really interested in talking about this book with you. Because sometimes when he talks about these things, I don't see it. I don't get it. Like, how do you not if you don't criticize the person, let's say,
Hmm.
how do they know that this was incorrect, and how do they sort of fix that? For example, in the have you seen The Last Dance,
No,
the Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls documentary?
no, I'm not really into basketball that much.
Oh, okay. But anyways, so Michael Jordan, right? So Michael Jordan used to criticize his teammates a lot,
Okay.
right? But they won 6 championships together.
Yeah.
And part of that was how hard he was on them. If Michael Jordan was like, all right, Scottie Pippen, all right, uh, the rest of you guys, no need to work hard as me, no need to show up and give 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, love that jump shot, excellent dunk. I don't
Yeah.
think they would be they would have had that place in history that they have now.
It reminds me of maybe people who are not into basketball but into movies. You remember that movie Whiplash
Yeah,
with the drummer and everything?
yeah, I absolutely remember it.
Yeah, I remember the teacher was very hard on this guy, and then one time they were having that conversation in a jazz bar or something like that,
Yeah,
and he talked about like there's no two words worse than good job. Yeah, remember that?
yeah, I recall now.
Yeah,
I guess that's just, like it's true. I guess these are just things that are fundamentally opposed. And well, the side he takes is the way I see it, even now, a lot of people will say the correct way is to, you have to criticize, you have to push. Some will say, okay, that's not the correct way, and some will propose a balance between the two. What Dale does is his whole thing is he focuses on being nice, and from what he's read and from his experience with the world, this is something that just works. So that's how he pushes it. And there's some interesting quotes in this. For example, he says, as much as we thirst for approval, we
hmm,
dread condemnation.
that's
They-
understandable.
they- yeah, that's understandable. I mean, remember when we talked about Hooked and how what these technology companies do is they look at a base human emotion and they try to use technology to remove as many steps as possible to tap
Right.
into that emotion. So it's the same here. Like what he's talking about is like there's some fundamental human needs. For example, we want approval, we seek approval, we don't want to be condemned. So if you flow along the nature of humans, you're bound to be able to get them to do what you want and appreciate your presence, let's say.
Well, I mean, you said that he has read many different biographies, like about Abraham Lincoln. I mean, this could be applicable for maybe politics or business. But would you give this advice to people, let's say, who have social anxiety?
I'm not sure, right? I mean, that's interesting.
I
I
mean,
I think
if somebody's
yeah.
reading this book because he or she wants to kind of get along with people better or make more friends or something like that, I in my opinion, of course, I'm no Dale Carnegie, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't tell them like just please them or agree with them or don't criticize them because then you're just kind of like doing whatever they're doing. I would just say kind of try to be yourself as much as possible. And if that leads to criticism, then so be it.
Yeah, that's fair, honestly. That's whenever we read a book, I try to watch some reviews or read Goodreads comments on it. And that was
Mhm.
something that people had mentioned.
Oh,
If you're just appeasing to others, is that really a way to win friendship? And Dale tackles some of this, and his point is, look, fundamentally be a nice person. If you have the opportunity to appreciate somebody, do it. Because people want approval. So if
okay.
if you have a friend and they do a good project, or if they're seeking your advice, help them in that. And that's something that will be rewarded. And don't unnecessarily criticize, you know.
Okay. Yeah.
That like it's a balanced approach. So that's the way he goes about it. And he says that, humans are not really creatures of logic. They're basically creatures of emotion. They're creatures, bristling with prejudices and motivated by pride and vanity. That's the way he takes humans to be. And he's saying that that's the approach of good relationships, understanding that humans seek approval and that they're creatures of emotion. And he says, if you approach humans in that manner, it'll be a lot easier for you to navigate life. Yeah, and
It reminds me of some kind of modern day crappy version of modern day Machiavelli's The Prince. You know that book?
I haven't read it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's basically he was from Florence, Italy, and he got exiled, and he really
Yeah.
loves Florence, and he wants it to be ruled well, and so he wrote this book to the Prince of Florence. That's why it's
Yeah.
called The Prince. So in the book, he talks about how an ideal prince should be like. In other words, how you deal with your enemies, your friends, how you rule people, how you rule army. And he gives
Right.
examples, like historical examples. Like, for example, the Ottoman Empire did this, and they did this correctly, or they did this incorrectly, etc., etc.
Yeah.
This sounds something like a weird modern version of that for like car salesmen or something. I don't know.
It's funny you say that because, believe it or not,
Yeah.
somebody who's uses in the book, he gives examples of people who've used his tactics, right? One of them is a car salesman. And he says it works because what used to happen is that, for example, he talks about, once a person says no,
Mhm.
they're unlikely to turn to a yes because it's an ego thing. And he says, what Dale says is that if you try to just argue with somebody and prove that you won an argument,
Mhm.
nobody really wins in that thing, right? So he's talking about this. There's this truck salesman, and when someone would be like, "Yeah, your trucks are terrible," he'd say, "No, this is why they're brilliant. No, oh, what are you using? Nah, that's terrible." And he'd argue with them, but he'd never go home with any sales
Right.
because sure, he proved that he has better mileage or whatever, but when you've hurt someone's pride, even if you've shown them the truth, they're unlikely to make that switch. And I think that's something we see between left and right wing activists as well. People
Probably.
are, yeah, like they just draw their lines in the sand, and even if you prove them incorrect, it's just a matter of it's their pride and ego, and they refuse to back down even if they see the truth. So he says, and there's something we can take from this. He says, like, there's better ways to manage it. Your focus shouldn't be to win the argument. And the next time this guy goes to sell his truck, and someone says your trucks are terrible, and he says, yeah, well, they do have some issues. These are the issues, but they're still not that bad. Like if you work in a way that you agree with the person and work your way from that, it's sort of different because you're agreeing with the person, so the person's no longer full defenses up mode, and it's a lot easier to convince them of something as opposed to say, nah, you're fundamentally wrong, your trucks are terrible, my truck is the best. That's not
Right.
really the way to go.
Yeah, I understand this from a business perspective, how this
Yeah.
makes sense. But as far as building or maintaining a relationship or a friendship is concerned, I don't know if that's good advice.
I don't know, man. Like, I think that, for example, if we talk about some of the flashpoints of the world, if you talk about, like, let's say, Israelis and Palestinians arguing,
Hmm.
it's a very, very complicated topic. And, I can't even pretend to be knowledgeable about it. And there's a lot of factors there. But what I'm trying to say is that when I'm talking about if you have a flashpoint like that, or let's say
Hmm.
right wing, left wing politics in the US, and
Right.
if your approach is, let's say you're a Trump supporter, everything that you say is wrong. And then you're like, wait, why won't this Trump supporter understand reason to what I'm saying?
Right.
Well,
Right.
you started off by calling him, like, what was Hillary called them? Basket of deplorables. Like once you say that,
That's what
it's
she was called.
unlikely. Yeah, that's what she called them.
That's not very catchy. Can you say that again?
Basket of deplorables.
Dude, who's gonna remember that? Wasn't it something like more catchy, more fascist-like? Wasn't it like Crooked Hillary or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, crooked Hillary is. That's what she said. Like that's what Trump does. He picks something simple like alliteration, crooked.
Mhm.
Actually, there's no alliteration there. My bad. But like crooked Hillary. Can we think of something? Never mind. We digress. But the
Yeah.
point is that once she labels them as that, they're unlikely to listen, even if she has the best policies. Like if someone comes up to me and he says, "Vote for me." By the way,
Hmm.
Mobeen, you're a terrible human being and you're stupid and you'll never amount to anything. But I have good policies. I'll be like, okay, you can take your policies, just get out of my house.
Right.
I'm not
Right.
interested, right?
Yeah.
And that's basically what he's talking about. So that's the sort of thing he talks about, when he says we dread condemnation and we seek approval, or when he talks about just things in this sense. That's what he really is talking about. Like if you want to win winning an argument, if your end goal is like he's saying, like if you just try to win arguments, you're not going to really achieve anything, and there's other ways to move forward, and that's
Right.
basically what it is. Yeah.
I understand.
And
Again, it's from all of these examples are kind of political and business-like, which I understand.
those are my
But
interests.
no, there are my interests as well, and it seems like it is also his or was his interests, and
Right.
assuming on what he's talking about in the biographies he's read. But my issue is, the title is called "How to Win Friends and
Yeah.
Influence People." It seems like it's more influencing people than winning friends, or not
All right.
really friendship. It's winning people, but not friendship.
Okay, fair. Then maybe that's, like there's so many principles in it that I just picked a few interesting ones and I focused on that. But I think what I did is I missed the friendship ones. So what I'll do is let me tell you little things that he talks about friendship. There's something that he mentioned was quite interesting for me, and he said that, you know, uh, as human beings, we have certain desires. You want to be healthy, you want to have nutrition, you want to be able to sleep, you want shelter. But there's another craving that we have, and it's a desire to be important. And that's
Okay.
not always fulfilled, right?
Right.
So he talks about when you want to when you want to make friends, you have to genuinely be interested in other people, right? Like
Yeah.
if my friend
And
yeah.
when you want to feel important, you start a podcast.
Yeah, man, you're giving it all away. Now
I'm
they
telling you,
know.
man. Yeah. Shortcuts to life, ladies and gentlemen.
That's the way to go, honestly. It's true
Yeah.
though. Davud
Yeah.
and I, we need this.
We need this,
So
man. We need to feel validated.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Hopefully after this episode we get a few more validation
Yeah,
subscribers.
we get that. We get that. I can't wait for the day I get that blue Twitter sticker.
But
You know,
isn't that something you can just request, or does that
I have no
require?
idea, honestly. I'm not interested in that kind of stuff. But it
All
looks
right.
like all of the important people have that blue thing.
Yeah, that's how they get you. That's how they do it. They're like, important people have this blue sticker. If you don't have the blue sticker, guess you're not important.
Yeah, and then when people get it, they're like, "Oh my god, I got my sticker!" Ah.
That's just how it is. Human beings, we're easily manipulated. It
Yeah.
doesn't take a lot for us to be happy. Like I imagine those people who get that blue verification. That's one of their biggest achievements in life, and there's no value to it.
Yeah,
It's not.
imagine if look, man, if that's your dream, goddamn,
Yeah.
it's always been my dream to get villain. Like come on, man. It's like when
Yeah.
people in like crappy management classes, they're like, "Hey, so tell me about yourself and what are your aspirations and stuff." And they're like, "Hello, I am blah blah blah, and I am blah blah blah, and I have always wanted to do marketing." Like, really? Is that always like what you were like 5 years
I,
old and
I,
you
I
wanted to do marketing?
honestly, I don't believe that. I don't think anyone
Eh,
truly wants to be in marketing
Hell,
for the
nobody
sake
does.
of the trade. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, come
that's
on.
find me somebody, like anyone who's listening, find us somebody who genuinely wants to be in marketing for the sake of the trade.
Yeah, and it's always been their dream.
Yeah,
Come on.
I agree with you. I completely refuse to believe that.
My dream was to be Superman. Still is.
Well, I gotta actually let me use Dale Carnegie's method. Well, I believe that if you truly wanted to, you could be. And I'm
What?
not gonna criticize on your dreams.
Dale, you're telling me if I jump off of a building I can fly?
He's dead, so you can't sue him. So he might as well say that because he has no liability here.
Yeah, true. God damn it. He tricked me. Con artist.
That's how he
He
does,
died,
man.
so I
Dale's
can't
a
sue him.
great trickster.
Yeah.
Yes, regarding friendship, I think the key that he mentions is that become genuinely interested in other people, and he gives examples
Mhm.
of how, let's say, there's a Boy Scout manager, and he goes to the president of the Boy Scouts because he wants to get extra funding for some trip to Europe, right? For
Right.
one of the kids.
Hmm.
And when he goes there, I believe he noticed, I think, a sailing boat or some other hobby related item in the room. And he talks to that guy regarding that item. And even though the guy had initially given him 10 minutes, because of showing interest in that person's hobby, they ended up talking for 2 hours, and the president ended up, giving a lot more funding than he'd even initially hoped. And to be honest, like this is something, like when we talk about giving historical context and things that might not be relevant now, this
Mm.
is something that's still relevant. Like if you, show interest in something that I'm passionate about, that's very enjoyable for me. And I imagine it's the same for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you don't want somebody just coming here and crapping all over it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and that's really how you make friends. So I think if there's any one key takeaway from this is if you want to be friends with somebody, show interest or learn about their interests.
Yeah.
It's very basic,
Yes,
I doubt
but
there are
I
people
would
that
I
don't
would
know that.
add the word
Yeah,
genuine. Genuinely
yeah,
show interest. Like it must be sincere. I'm not. I don't want this to be taken. I don't know how Dale Carnegie wanted this to be read or applied, but I would
yeah.
personally say, if you can't be genuine or if you don't have an interest, just don't do it. Don't lie about it. Don't
No,
be a fakester.
absolutely. That's fair. And that's how Dale puts it as well. And I think that's the way to take it. So a lot of what like, there's so many more principles, right? But these were
Mhm.
sort of the fundamental ones that I wanted to gloss over because
Okay.
they're really the ones that matter, Don't criticize, appreciate other people as often as you can, be genuinely interested in their interests, and remember that humans are creatures of emotion, not logic, and everyone has a desire to be important. So if you sort of focus in, let's say, these five fundamental principles or remember these notions, you're
Mhm.
somebody who's going to end up having a lot of friends or people that love you. And
Yeah.
it doesn't require a lot, frankly, because you realize that you want the same. You want friends who will do the same for you.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I can't personally agree with it, but I understand that like perspective.
Yeah. I mean, what do you fundamentally disagree with?
I mean, I don't think I genuinely want to have like lots of friends or be loved just for the sake of being loved and having lots of friends.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like I mean I'm aware of it's like this. Like I'm aware of that irrational need to be loved and wanted and have plenty of friends. But I understand that it's highly irrational, and to try to please that sensation is just like stupid. I mean, it's kind of like I mean, I'm not a dog, Like I understand the emotion, and I don't have to act on this irrational feeling. It doesn't make any sense, personally. Like, I mean, just
To be
expanding my friend circle for the sake of expanding it. I mean, come on.
That's fair. No, I completely get that. And that's an interesting take on it. That's not really how I saw it when I read the book, but you're quite right. If there's some, fundamental human instincts,
Yeah, just
maybe it's
just
not
because
best
it's
to.
fundamental and it's like biologically wired for me to have this. It doesn't mean I have to act on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you on that front. So yeah, that's basically the book. Before we finish off, there was just one part in the book that I actually really enjoyed. He says education. This was the former president of Princeton University. I don't know if that adds any credibility to the
Yeah.
upcoming quote, but he felt the need to mention this, so I might as well.
Okay.
And he says that education is the ability to meet life's situations. And I just thought that was interesting because that's not really how we study these days. You know, that's like
Education is the ability to
meet life situations.
meet life situations.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Lives,
Lives,
like a
yeah.
person's life. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting take.
Yeah, and I quite liked it because it's true, like I did learn how to do linear regression, but
Oh yeah.
it
Oh
didn't
yeah.
really help me to do my taxes or understand, the moral responsibility to have to other citizens in like ensuring we have a good public sphere of life or how I should make friends or influence people.
What? You're
But
telling me linear digression did not do you anything? Oh, come on, man. You must have.
well, okay, to be fair, you could use linear regression to figure out some of these things, but I never said I was a good student, so there's
Yeah,
that
for sure.
too.
Yeah. No, but
Right.
100%, you're right. Nowadays, I mean, university education just looks like a bunch of theory.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
either a lot of theory or it's just like preparing you for a job that you might not necessarily want.
That's true as well. I guess, maybe I'm not sure of a book that I've read recently that tackled this topic in more depth, but I can look it up and maybe I can read it for one of the upcoming weeks.
Yeah,
That
I mean,
would be
I'm really
interesting.
interested in the direction academia is, heading towards.
Okay, let's look
It
into it
looks
then. Let's
more and
cover it.
more business-like, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's because it's sort of like, I mean, not to go into too much detail, but it's sort of like the misaligned interests, it requires a lot of money to run academia, and the money comes from businesses. When you talk about private institutions, the money's coming from businesses.
Yeah,
So what they teach has to be aligned with the person providing the money, which is why there should be a lot more public universities, and public universities should be run
exactly.
much well. I mean, it's quite an interesting topic. We should definitely cover it.
Yeah,
For
I'd
this
love
book,
to.
though, I hope you liked it. I would, if we go to our usual rating,
Okay,
I would give it a solid 7 out of 10.
solid 7. Okay.
Yeah, because it was an easy read, but some things felt repetitive, and there are tons of great examples for sure. And I think the examples are really what sell the principles. So that's
Hmm.
why I enjoyed the book. But it wasn't a groundbreaking. I would still recommend it because I only covered a couple of principles. If those principles were enjoyable, then there's a lot more in this book that one can gain from it. But
Right.
I'd give it a solid 7.
Okay, that sounds fair.
All right,
All
then I
right.
guess this is it for this week. What will you cover for us next week, Davud?
It's undecided, but it's probably one of two things, or three maybe.
Let's
Either
hear
I'll
them.
be discussing Plato's work, or one of his works. It's called The Apology, and
Okay.
it's basically Socrates was on trial, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was accused of being corrupt man and like, he-
Right.
I don't want to get into the details. Basically, it's just a short read about Socrates defending himself in his trial.
I understand. That sounds
Yeah.
interesting. And the other two?
The other one is called it's about fascism.
Mm-hmm.
What was the name of the book? It was something like Fascism: A Warning or something like that. Basically, it's about briefly about history of fascism, how it works, how fascists like the way they speak, they
That's
cater.
actually quite interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, to be honest, I'm interested in both of them, but the fascist one seems more interesting and more, let's say, on the nose considering the current political climate.
definitely. It is. It's a recent book,
But
so
that's my vote then, but maybe we can ask our viewers to comment below.
yeah. So those couple
And
of
then we
guys, man, what do you think?
can... All right, then. Okay,
Yeah,
looking
thank you.
forward to it, man. This is it, guys. Was our podcast for this week. As always, if you have any comments, any suggestions, feel free to share them. If you'd like us to cover any books, or if you'd like to see this podcast go in a certain direction, we're always open to suggestions. In fact, we're actively searching for them. Thank you for
Exactly.
listening.
Thank you for listening.